In 1961, it became illegal to get a tattoo in New York City. Not in 1861, in 1961. The city that considered itself the cultural capital of the world, the city of jazz and abstract expressionism and the Beat Generation, made it a crime to mark the human skin with ink. The ban lasted until 1997. 36 years. An entire generation of New Yorkers grew up in a city where tattooing was a criminal act. New York wasn't alone. Massachusetts banned tattooing in 1962. The ban lasted until 2000. Oklahoma banned it in 1963 and didn't lift the prohibition until 2006. South Carolina banned tattooing until 2004. Think about that. In the 21st century, in the United States of America, there were states where putting ink into your own skin was against the law. And it wasn't just America. Japan banned tattooing in 1872 under the Meiji government. The ban wasn't fully lifted until 1948, and the stigma persists so deeply that tattooed individuals are still banned from public bathhouses, gyms, and swimming pools across the country today. South Korea classified tattooing as a medical procedure, making it illegal for anyone except a licensed physician to perform it, a law that effectively criminalized the entire practice and that remained enforced well into the 2000s. Denmark banned tattooing of the face, neck, and hands in 1966. Across the world, in country after country, across the entire 20th century, governments decided that marking the human body was something that needed to be controlled, restricted, or outright prohibited. I need you to hold that for a moment, because the official reasons given for these bans were always the same: public health, hygiene, the risk of hepatitis, the danger of infection, reasonable-sounding concerns dressed in medical language. And the deeper I went, the more those reasons looked like a costume draped over something much older and much more deliberate. Because the criminalization of tattooing in the 20th century wasn't new. It was the final chapter of a suppression campaign that had been running for 1700 years. And the campaign wasn't about hygiene. It was about what the tattoos meant, what they carried, what they encoded on the human body that certain institutions could not afford to let people remember. Start with the body they pulled from a glacier in 1991, because this body changed everything and almost nobody noticed. Ötzi, the Iceman, 5,300 years old, discovered in the Alps on the border between Austria and Italy. The oldest intact human remains ever found in Europe, preserved so perfectly that researchers could determine his last meal, the diseases he carried, the injuries he sustained. And on his skin, 61 tattoos. Lines and crosses and dots grouped in patterns across his lower back, his knees, his ankles, his wrists. 61 deliberate marks made by rubbing charcoal into incisions cut into living skin 5 millennia before the modern tattoo parlor existed. And here's the detail that stopped me. The tattoos on Ötzi's body are not decorative. They don't form images. They don't depict animals or symbols or scenes. They are grouped at specific anatomical locations that correspond with remarkable precision to classical acupuncture points. Points used in traditional Chinese medicine to treat the specific conditions that Ötzi's body shows evidence of suffering from. Arthritis in his joints, degenerative disease in his spine, gastrointestinal problems identified through analysis of his intestinal contents. The tattoos are located at the exact points where a traditional healer would apply treatment for these exact conditions. 2,000 years before the earliest known Chinese acupuncture texts were written, a man in the European Alps was receiving tattoo-based therapeutic treatment at acupuncture points. Not decorative art, medicine, encoded in the skin, carried on the body, a medical record, and a treatment protocol written in ink and scar tissue on the surface of a living human being. This raises a simple but critical question. If tattooing was a medical technology, practiced across cultures for thousands of years. What happened to it? And why did the civilizations that replaced the old cultures work so hard to make it disappear? Because the scope of ancient tattooing is staggering, and the deeper I looked, the more universal the practice became. The Egyptians tattooed. Female mummies from the Middle Kingdom, roughly 4,000 years old, showed tattoo patterns on the abdomen and thighs that researchers have linked to fertility and childbirth protection. The patterns aren't random decoration. They're positioned at specific anatomical sites associated with reproductive function. The Polynesians tattooed. The word tattoo itself comes from the Polynesian tatau. In Polynesian cultures, tattooing was a sacred practice, not optional decoration, mandatory inscription. The tattoo encoded your genealogy, your social status, your spiritual authority, your place in the cosmos. A Polynesian person without tattoos was incomplete, unwritten, spiritually naked. The indigenous peoples of North America tattooed. The Inuit tattooed. The Ainu of Japan tattooed. The Berbers of North Africa tattooed. The Celts tattooed. The Picts, whose name literally derives from the Latin pictus, meaning painted or tattooed, were described by Roman observers as covered in markings that served spiritual and martial purposes. Every culture the Romans encountered at the edges of their empire practiced tattooing. Every single one. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision across every pre-Christian, pre-Islamic, pre-colonial culture that has been documented. Tattooing was universal, not common, universal. And every culture that did it treated it not as art, but as technology, as medicine, as spiritual infrastructure, as a system for encoding information on the human body that served purposes the modern world has either forgotten or been taught to dismiss. The silence was deafening when I started tracing when the tattoos stopped, because they didn't stop gradually. They were stopped, forcibly, by specific institutions at specific moments in history. As if they were following instructions they didn't fully understand. The Roman Empire was the first major Western power to legislate against tattooing. In 316 AD, Emperor Constantine, the same Constantine who converted Rome to Christianity, banned facial tattooing. The stated reason was that the face was made in God's image and should not be defaced. The theological justification was new. The practice it targeted was ancient, and the ban was the beginning of a campaign against tattooing that would span 17 centuries and reach its 20th century conclusion in the courthouses of New York and Oklahoma and the police stations of Tokyo and Seoul. The deeper I went into the Christian suppression of tattooing, the more systematic and more deliberate it appeared. Because tattooing, as it was practiced in the pre-Christian world, was a distributed knowledge system. The marks on the body carried information. Medical information, genealogical information, spiritual information, tribal affiliation, healing protocols, cosmological maps. The tattoo was a text written on the body in a language that the institutional church could not read, could not control, and could not replace with its own text, and the church needed to replace it. The Christian project required a monopoly on spiritual information, on healing authority, on the relationship between the body and the divine, a population that carried its own spiritual text on its own skin, that didn't need a priest to interpret its relationship to God because that relationship was literally inscribed on its body, was a population that didn't need the church. The tattoo had to go so that the book could be the only text. The skin had to be cleared so that the soul could be written on exclusively by institutional authority. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision across every colonial encounter. In Japan, the Meiji government's 1872 ban targeted irezumi, a tradition of extraordinary sophistication that encoded social identity, spiritual meaning, and artistic mastery. The ban was part of a campaign to westernize Japan to strip away the practices that marked Japanese culture as different from the European standard. the same European standard that had been stripping tattoos from its own population for 15 centuries. In New Zealand, the British colonial administration suppressed tamoko, the sacred Maori tattooing tradition. Tamoko wasn't body decoration. It was identity. Each moko was unique. It encoded genealogy, tribal affiliation, social status, and personal history. The colonial suppression of tamoko was an attack on Maori identity at the most fundamental level. In North America, indigenous tattooing traditions were suppressed through the residential school systems that forcibly assimilated indigenous children. Children were forbidden from maintaining any cultural practices, including tattooing, that connected them to their pre-colonial identity. And then, in the 20th century, the bans went medical. New York, Massachusetts, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Japan, South Korea. The religious justification had lost its power in a secular age, so the justification was updated. Hygiene, hepatitis, public health. The costume changed, the suppression continued. The practice that had been banned for theological reasons for 15 centuries was now banned for medical reasons that conveniently produced the same outcome. No marks on the skin, no distributed knowledge, no text that the institution couldn't read. Here's where the thread connects to something that modern medicine is beginning to rediscover. Because the therapeutic function of Ötzi's tattoos wasn't an isolated curiosity. Multiple researchers have now documented that tattoo locations on ancient bodies from different cultures correspond to known acupuncture and acupressure points at rates that significantly exceed chance. The correspondence crosses cultural boundaries. European mummies, South American mummies, Polynesian traditional tattoo placement all show statistically significant correlation with therapeutic point systems. The deeper I went, the more the ancient tattoo started to look like a technology that mainstream medicine has spent centuries dismissing because the cultures that practiced it were classified as primitive. A technology for marking the body at specific points that correspond to therapeutic intervention sites, practiced independently across cultures with no contact, arriving at the same anatomical conclusions about where on the body specific conditions could be treated. And here's the part that modern research finds most difficult to explain. The tattoo might not just mark a therapeutic point. It might be the therapeutic intervention itself. Emerging research on the effects of tattooing on the immune system suggests that the process of tattooing triggers an immune response at the tattoo site. The body mobilizes immune resources to the location of the tattoo. It creates a localized zone of enhanced immune activity that persists for the life of the tattoo. What if the ancient practitioners knew this? What if the tattoo at the acupuncture point wasn't just marking the point? What if the act of tattooing was the treatment? The insertion of pigment into the skin at a specific anatomical location, triggering a sustained immune response, creating a permanent zone of enhanced biological activity at the precise point where the body needed support. Go back to Ötzi. Look at his tattoos, placed at points corresponding to his arthritic joints, his degenerative spine, his gastrointestinal distress, not decorating his body, treating it permanently with a technology that required no pharmaceutical supply chain, no institutional authority, no recurring prescription, a single intervention inscribed in the skin working for the remaining lifetime of the patient. And this technology was banned in New York until 1997, in Massachusetts until 2000, in Oklahoma until 2006, in South Korea effectively until the 2020s, in Japan since 1872, by the Roman Empire since 316 AD, by every colonial administration that encountered it in indigenous cultures across the world, banned, suppressed, criminalized, stigmatized for 17 centuries by every institutional power that encountered it. I'm not telling you that your local tattoo parlor is a medical clinic. The modern tattoo has been stripped of its therapeutic context. But I'm asking what the tattoo was before it was decoration. What knowledge system it was part of. What therapeutic function it served across dozens of independent cultures for thousands of years. I'm asking why New York City, in 1961, decided that marking the human skin was a criminal act, why Oklahoma maintained that position until 2006, why South Korea classified it as a medical procedure requiring a physician, why Japan's 1872 ban created a stigma that persists 150 years later, why every power structure that has dominated human civilization for the past 17 centuries has specifically, consistently, across every continent and every century, targeted the practice of putting meaningful marks on human skin. I'm asking what was written on the bodies of your ancestors that someone needed you to never read. I'm asking what Ötzi knew about his own body 5,000 years ago that your doctor doesn't know about yours today. Handed a blank skin and told it was natural.